Welcome to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research virtually. My name is Alex Weiser. I'm the Director of Public Programs of YIVO. We're so pleased to have you here with us today for a discussion of the new book, The Dancer and the Holocaust, a biography of Pola Nireńska. Before we get started, just a very brief word about YIVO. For those of you that don't know YIVO, we're a very special place for the celebration and contemplation of Jewish history and Jewish culture. We have a library and archives with over 23 million documents and over 400,000 books, which are used by researchers from around the world. We bring to life the world of those collections with public programs like this, with a variety of classes, and with exhibitions. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan Brandt, YIVO's Executive Director and CEO, who will be chairing today's program. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to everyone who is joining us today from all over the United States, from Iowa, the land of corn and pigs, and from the Sunshine State, and from all over New York State, from Warsaw, and elsewhere abroad. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Before we get started with the core of the program, I do want to say a couple of words about another series that we are going to be launching here at YIVO, of which this is really in many ways the first. It's a series, the title of which is Knowledge Under Siege. And it will be a series of programs on new scholarship from Poland that will present new Polish school of research into the Holocaust and antisemitism that is informed by critical theory and cultural critique. And that is something that we will be getting underway in the spring of 2023. In the meantime, I want also to mention that YIVO is a partner with the Jewish Historical Institute YIVO in Warsaw in awarding annually the Karski and Nirenska Award. We all know the name Jan Karski. Jan Karski was a soldier, a Polish soldier, a resistance fighter, a diplomat. He was the courier who brought news of the Holocaust to President Roosevelt and to others, memorably to Felix Frankfurter, who said he simply could not or would not believe what Karski told him. He is a world famous figure, and we honor him through the annual award. However, the award has two names attached to it. One is Karski, the other is Nirenska, Pola Nireńska. Unknown figure to most of us, and unknown to history, in fact. In many ways, very little has been written about her, but she was the wife of Jan Karski. She was Jewish. Karski was Polish. He loved her, as our speaker today will explain, in a very complicated relationship. But we know so little of her. And it seemed to me, with the publication of Weronika Kostyrko's book, The Dancer and the Holocaust, a study of Pola Nirenska, that it was high time that YIVO devoted a program to Pola Nirenska, not only because she was the wife of Jan Karski, but because she was an artist in her own right, and because the history of women has been so often excluded from the publications about the history of Jewish life in Eastern Europe. And so today we are going to be treated really to a conversation with Weronika Kostyrko, who has worked for 20 years for the Polish newspaper Gazeta Wyborcza as parliament reporter and as correspondent in Germany. She is editor-in-chief of the newspaper's women's supplement, Wysokie Abkhazia. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, but I used to be the editor.
You used to be.
I'm not anymore.
And and Weronika has published many life stories of outstanding Jewish female figures. From 2011, she has served for 5 years at the Adam Mickiewicz Institute as editor-in-chief of Culture, and has provided many articles on Yiddish culture, bios of Jewish artists, and is currently working on a biography of Rosa Luxemburg. If there are any translators or publishers in our audience today, I suggest that you look into a translation, an English language translation of this book, and a publication of it in English. And now, without further commentary, I want to ask Weronika to speak for about 20 minutes to give a kind of context and background to this subject. And then we will have maybe 20 or 30 minutes of conversation, and then the program will be open to questions from the audience. Weronika?
Thank you very much. I have to say that for the first time in my life, I am speaking in English to an international audience. I've got butterflies, but a friend told me this morning, Pola is behind you. So thank you for having us here. First, let me show you her picture. It will take just a short moment. Yeah. Oh, that's Pola. Who was Nirenska? Who was Pola Nireńska? Pola Nireńska was a Jewish avant-garde dancer. She lived and worked in the interwar period in Poland, Germany, Austria, Italy, and Great Britain. After the war, she settled in Washington and married the Polish diplomat Jan Karski. She committed suicide in 1992. She was born 1910 in Warsaw as Pola Nirensztajn into a middle-class Jewish family. Her father was a prosperous tie maker. There is no family photo preserved, the photo of the whole family. But here you can see their house in a very special place in Thematic, in the Jewish district of Warsaw, right next to Biblioteka Judaistyczna, the Judaistic bibliothek, to the right of the picture. And it was very close, actually, right to the Great Synagogue in Thematic Street. At the age of 13, Pola Nireńska was witness to a pogrom in the Jewish quarter. As a 17-year-old girl, against the wishes of her parents, she left for Dresden to study expressionist dance, Ausdruckstanz. After Hitler came to power, Pola's beloved teacher, Mary Wigman, you can see here her here in the middle of her students, her pupils. Mary Wigman became an ardent promoter of Nazi aesthetics. Pola had to leave Germany and spent the following year in Poland, where her art was occasionally discredited as non-Polish or degenerate by critics alluding to her Jewish background. After leaving Poland in 1934, Nirenska danced in Austria and in fascist Italy. In 1936, she settled in London, where she spent the following 13 years. She married there twice, performed solo on stage, choreographed a musical, and entertained Polish military troops. Occasionally, she was also modeling, like here, where you can see her in a picture taken by Lee Miller, the famous American photographer who worked in London during the war. Pola's parents and her brother moved to Palestine in 1935, but the rest of the family perished in Poland during the Holocaust. After the war, Nirenska visited her parents twice and performed on stage in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem with great success. She could stay there. She could live with her parents. She had an offer to work as a dance teacher, but she rejected the possibility to settle down in Israel. In 1949, she moved to the USA, first to New York, then to Washington. She created there a modern dance school and a dance group, her own dance group. In 1957, she met the former Polish diplomat Jan Karski. 8 years later, she married him. After the marriage, she stopped working at the top of her career. She tried to be a good wife. She even attended a school of French cuisine. Here you can see her diploma from the School of French Cuisine. It's the only document preserved in the collection of her papers from the period between 1968 and 78, as if at that time she didn't exist. It's a gap in her papers. The problem was that being a good wife didn't work for her. She suffered a long depression. You can see her here in a picture taken by her neighbor and friend, Ray Schandelmeier, who is, I hope he's with us right now. I invited him to take part in this event. So Pola didn't dance for 10 years. In this time, she tried to kill herself for at least 5 times. She recovered only when she started working again, not dancing, but choreographing. Working as a choreographer, she did not take the subject of her personal loss until the last years of her life, when she created her most important work, the Holocaust tetralogy. It was a great success and her last work. She committed suicide 2 years later, on one rainy day in July 1992. She jumped out of the window when Karski left apartment only for a short while to buy cigarettes. This beautiful picture is also taken by Ray Schandelmeier. That's Pola in the last years and months of her life. And that's me on her grave a few years ago. So I would like to explain why did I find her story so fascinating, and I wanted to tell it. Because, first of all, it's a story of emancipation. In the interwar period, Jewish women in Poland chose 4 paths of emancipation through Zionism, communism, socialism, and through art. The last way was the most difficult because the one who chose it went alone. Pola Nireńska spent all her dowry for learning to dance. She swore to her father that after graduation she would become a teacher, that she would never stand on the stage herself. She broke that promise. Her way to personal freedom couldn't have been more difficult, given her background and the political circumstances. As Jewish avant-garde dancer, as Jewish artist, she has been banished from 4 countries. After the war, she followed the top avant-garde dancers from Europe to New York. Then, unexpectedly, she gave up her art for marriage and paid for it with a long and severe depression. At the end of her life, she triumphed as an artist once again, but at a horrendous price. The second reason to talk about Pola Nireńska is that it's a story about fluid identity, national, gender, and religious. Pola's parents spoke Yiddish, but only when they didn't want their children to understand them. The family spoke Polish every day. They visited synagogue only on the high holidays. They sent their 3 daughters to a Catholic private school, but their only son completed German agricultural school before moving to Palestine. So they moved on the border between the worlds. Pola grew up in the border zone, and then moved on from country to country as solo artist, starting from scratch again and again. She probably never defined her national identity for herself and never seemed preoccupied with it when she came to the USA in 1949. I don't know if she would ever call herself an American. I'm sure she would call herself an artist. This would be probably her answer if you would ask her about her identity. She was an artist. Her gender identity was also fluid. She married more than 1 time, but I discovered that she fell in love with women. She concealed it all her life long. And after her death, Jan Karski cleared her papers before he handed them over to the Library of Congress. I found there only 1 trace, and then I could identify several of her lovers. Their letters are preserved in archives in Berlin, London, and Vienna, where I found them. The letters are preserved, also Pola's love letters, because they were famous artists. Being lesbian there and then in Germany, Austria, Italy, England of the 1930s and 40s was not only socially condemned, but also illegal. Most likely it was unacceptable for Pola's family. This, alongside anti-Semitic persecutions, was the reason for her to constantly move on. And her constant migration obstructed her dance career. And then about her religious identity. It's also complicated. Pola's parents were not religious. Studying dance in Dresden, she herself was fascinated by Buddhism. She had many books on different religions in her private library, but she never was a believer. Around 1960, Jan Karski asked Pola to convert before Catholic marriage when he proposed to her. It was a kind of condition. for the marriage. She agreed, saying, "Why not, if the mother of your God was Jewish?" But she regretted it in her later years when she reached back to the story of her family. The fluid identities make this biography challenging, interesting, and significant. The third reason I found this story so important to tell is the question of the Polish share of responsibility for the Holocaust. Pola Nireńska blamed Poles for the death of her beloved sister Franka, who escaped the ghetto in Warsaw and didn't get help from her Polish friends. Knowing that, Nirenska never visited Poland again and refused to speak Polish, even with Karski. Why, after the war, did she marry a Polish Catholic, whose life story is now often misused as a symbol of allegedly general Polish solidarity with persecuted Jews? It was the Polish diplomat Karski who let President Roosevelt know about the fate of Jews in occupied Poland. That's what Jonathan talked about before we started. He was brave enough to enter in disguise not only the Warsaw Ghetto, but also a transit camp for Jews being deported to Bełżec death camp. Karski was humble enough not to talk about this mission until Claude Lanzmann forced him to do this as late as 1978 for his Shoah documentary. However, working on Pola's biography, I discovered an unknown fact. As a young diplomat in 1938, Jan was a member of a special unit at the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This special unit was dedicated to the so-called solution of the Jewish problem. The main idea was a forced emigration to Madagascar or another Western colony. The young Karski made a personal contribution to this anti-Semitic policy of the Polish state. His original idea was, if the French make it difficult with Madagascar, why not to try with Mozambique? Let's engage in the diplomatic game with Portugal. I found a relevant document signed by him in the archives of the Polish Foreign House. I can hardly believe that I'm the first to have seen this document. It has never been published. And the fact is, you will not find this fact in the biographies of Karski, in any of them. So, thinking about Pola again, did they ever speak about this? The marriage of Pola Nireńska and Jan Karski was difficult. It was often stormy. She was very emotional and spontaneous, and he was very rational and restrained. He wanted to protect her, but he couldn't understand her. According to friends, after Pola's suicide, he suffered deeply for years and years. I wrote a book about concealing, forgetting, and remembering. I have described in this book the long work of discovering the life of Pola Nireńska, not to focus on myself as a researcher and journalist, but to convince readers that most questions finally get their answers. There is so much about concealing and forgetting in this story, and remembering is all we can do. The only answer I am still waiting for is what happened to Franka Schwarzwald, Pola's beloved sister. I can't stop thinking about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Weronika. Thank you very much. It's a very moving story, and there are many questions that are being asked in our chat room, and I hope that we get to some of those questions, which I think will require a lot of complicated discussion. Before we do that, though, I wonder if you have any insight into why did Pola marry Karski in the first place? What was it? I know you spoke of this, but what was special about that? Do you have any particular insight into it?
It's a very difficult question, a very good one. I asked this question to Pola's friends. When I came to Washington 8 years ago, I had the opportunity to meet several friends of Pola from the last period of her life. And I asked every one of them this question: why did Pola marry Karski? Because it was obvious, actually, from the first, not from the first moment, but very soon it became obvious to me that they were very different, very. And only the fact that she refused to go to Poland and she refused to speak Polish, even with Karski, let me think about this. Why did she marry him? And one of their friends, George Jackson, the dance critic of the Washington Post, he has put it this way: Jan loved Pola very much, and he wanted it very much, and she agreed. So speaking, we were talking more about this, and he and other friends explained to me that Pola, she was not young at that time. It happened 65, so she was 55 years old. She was a self-made woman. She was very successful in her school and in her dance group. But she probably didn't want to be alone in her later years. And he just loved her very much. And I asked the question, why did he marry Pola, to people who knew him very well? Like, there were several people whom I could find in Washington at that time. And one of them, Kaja Mirecka-Ploss, told me he has married her. He wanted to marry her because she was Jewish. It was a very short and simple answer. Because he had an issue with Jews, with his attempt to save Jews during the war, and his failure to do it. Because you probably know he said at some point that he wanted to save all Jews, but he wasn't able to save not one Jew, not even one Jew, not even one Jewish life. It was, emotions are complicated, so you will never know the answer. But I'm sure it had something to do with the fact she was Jewish. Yeah. And it's really dramatic, because you have to imagine there are two Americans, let's say. She's a woman with Jewish background, Jewish origins, who came to the United States 1949. He came to the United States several years earlier. And they both have built their life there. Pola had her school, had her dance group, and she felt an American self-made woman, actually. I spoke about her identity before. she had actually no national identity. She was actually, when she met him, she was American. He was American too. There is a very interesting essay about him published several years ago, actually at the same time when my book was published, written by the Polish writer Tomasz Lubieński. And his idea is that Karski, after the war, didn't want to be Polish anymore, that he has he was very fond of being Polish before the war. He was very dedicated to his work for the Foreign Office. He was a perfect clerk, a young clerk. And then this Poland collapsed. And then he was witness to the Holocaust, and he was also aware of Polish anti-Semitism. And after the war, he didn't come back to the United States, and he was a brave American. He was working for CIA for many years, which he never concealed. He was not talking stories about this. He was not talkative about this subject. But he worked for the CIA, for FBI. He was teaching at the Georgetown University. And he never visited Poland also after the war. So you have two Americans who meet, and then suddenly, he could define himself as an American for himself, but for her, he was a Pole, a Catholic Pole. And she could define herself as an American, but for him, she was a Jew. Because he wanted to marry a Jew, like his friend said. So this made this marriage so complicated for both of them, because they both had issues with being Polish, being Jewish, and and this trauma of the past. Karski said they would never talk about the past, which I can hardly believe. But he said it more than one time, that they never talked about the past, never spoke about the past. Maybe it was for the first years, the first period of their marriage, maybe they didn't talk about the past. I'm sure they had to talk about this. The last moment was when Claude Lanzmann came to speak with Karski about his wartime experience. I'm sure Pola had to be part of this somehow. So it was very a lot of emotions, very different personalities. He extremely rational. Everybody who talked to him says it. Who met him says it. But he was very rational and so restrained, a diplomat. She very emotional, very straightforward, very spontaneous. And the past behind them, like a stormy cloud. So it's a mystery, but very fascinating mystery.
The title of your book is The Dancer and the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And in that title, you imply, as I take it, that there was this past that they could not escape, that she could not escape.
Yeah.
And, I wonder, aside from the last great dance that she produced, mm-hmm. The extent to which, in your view, the Holocaust was, in fact, though she never spoke of it, as mm-hmm. you suggest, was nevertheless shaping her understanding of herself, of her destiny, and maybe also the relationship with Jan Karski.
I'm sure you're right. It it was a heavy, you know, it was something above her head all the time. And, you know, a young dancer explained it to me that why did she suffer this depression when she didn't dance? A dancer told me, dance is communication, and it's necessary when there are things we are not talking about. You need to express. You can express it through dance, and it's like breathing for somebody with this, you know, with this experience. And really, her depression was extremely difficult and extremely severe. And it ended when she started choreographing and not dancing really, but dealing with dance again. So I think, although she didn't want to talk about this, to think about this, it was always behind her, and she had to express it, and she expressed it in this last choreography. And she paid for it really. I describe it in my book. She working on this last choreography, she had another episode of depression, very severe, very difficult. She was she had to go to the hospital again with depression, working on the tetralogy of the Holocaust. But then, you know, she did it, and she never choreographed again. It was her last word, as to say. And then she committed suicide, which is also a complicated question. Why? Of course, I asked this question to all her friends, and everybody gave another answer. One friend told me she fell in love with a young woman. Another person told me she was very ill in her, physically ill. She couldn't move anymore. She suffered great pain from arthritis. And another person told me she killed herself because she converted to Catholicism before, and she regretted it. She felt guilty against her, you know, her family, the memory of her family, that she converted to Catholicism before. So it was one of the answers. And you know what was the answer of Jan Karski? I had not an occasion to ask this question to Karski, because I started working on the book after he was dead. But somebody asked him about this. Why did Pola kill herself? And he said, she only wanted to plant the flowers. There were flowers in their apartment, in the window, in the balcony actually. So his diplomatic answer was, it was not a suicide. And I think it was too difficult for him to talk about this. I know he suffered a lot, because there are many people telling about his suffering, but he was not able to talk about this, to speak about this.
Well, there is so much for us to talk about, but I know that there are many, many questions from the people who are watching.
That's good news.
And I would like to open this up to those questions now. Alex, can you?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a lot of questions about her time with Mary Wigman. So maybe we could start back with that. One viewer asked, is there a record of her feelings about Mary Wigman? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Her feelings, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. In the New York Public Library, there are Mary Wigman's letters to Pola Nireńska. They are in the collection of the New York Public Library. I have read them, and Pola's letters to Wigman are not preserved. Probably it was Wigman who didn't keep them. And what is important, it was a love relation. It was Pola's first love, because Wigman was also lesbian, and it's a fact. It is not also difficult to find in books about Mary Wigman. There are many books about Mary Wigman, a lot of them published in the United States. There is one big biography of Mary Wigman published in Germany a few years ago, and I have met the author, and I asked her, the author, did she know about Wigman being lesbian? And she said she did know, but she didn't think it was important in this biography. The biography was published a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago now. So Mary Wigman had love relationships with her pupils, and Pola was one of them. And it was very important for Pola because it was her first love, and at the same time it was her beloved teacher. And it's a little like the relation between Hannah Arendt and Heidegger. That Hannah Arendt said that it was Heidegger who has taught her to think and to love. And for Nirenska, it was Wigman who has taught her to dance and to love. And she was after she left Germany, Pola, in 1933. She came back in 1935 to see Wigman. And there was a difficult, the meeting was difficult emotionally for Pola, first of all. And afterwards, Pola knew that Wigman was making big career in the Third Reich. And she always denied it. She was about 75 when she stood up at a conference in New York about Mary Wigman, where somebody said Mary Wigman was a Nazi. And it was Pola Nireńska who stood up and said, I have known Mary Wigman. She was never a Nazi, which was not true. So it's the letters from Wigman to Pola are not published, but they are everybody can read them in the New York Public Library as originals.
Another reviewer asks more about Wigman. Is it known why she left Dresden? And if Wigman perhaps asked her to leave, or?
Yes, I think, that's a good answer to this question gave me again George Jackson, the dance critic of the Washington Post. He said there were two reasons for Pola to leave. One was that she was Jewish, although Wigman was such an important person in the Third Reich that she could even keep some Jewish dancers. She had a permission to keep some Jewish dancers in her school and in her dance group. But Pola, the second reason for Pola to leave was that she was lover. She was Wigman's lover. And that's also, Wigman had to conceal it in the Third Reich.
Moving on to the dance that she studied, the Ausdruck-Tanz. How would you say that influenced the style that she ended up teaching herself?
She was actually always during her life, she tried several dance styles. She never developed her own style. It was, in my opinion, because she was constantly moving, migrating, escaping. She really didn't have time to work on her own style. She spent 13 years in Great Britain, but it was during the war, and she had to make her living. And it was very difficult at that time for her to make a living. I showed the pictures of her dancing for Polish soldiers. She was dancing Polish folk dances, which was definitely not her cup of tea, but she had to make her living. So she never developed her own style, and she tried different styles. Like when she came to the United States, 1949, she tried to dance like American dancers did at that time, which was different than Europe. It was more movement, less acting. And the Ausdruck stance was a lot of acting, not only dynamic movement. So, we can talk about something like Pola's style. It has always been close to the Ausdruck stance, to the expressionist dance, with big gestures, with great emotions, with very graphic kind of dance, very actually conservative, although it has his lovers, this style.
Another question about her time in Dresden. Have you come across anything to do with the dancer Judith Berg, who was a compatriot, also studying with Mary Wigman, and who
I
went
don't
on to open a Jewish
at the
dance school in
moment.
Warsaw?
I'm not sure. I would have to check it. It has been several years now when I was, researching this. But they were not friends. It's not one of her friends.
There are a few questions about ways that viewers can learn more about her in English. Are there other sources other than what we've shared from your book that's been translated? Are there other sources in English? Are there films of her dancing or choreography that people can access? And they suggest, the libraries in New York or in Israel.
There is no film of Pola dancing, which I regret a lot. I was looking for it in different archives in many countries, because I visited, I think, 5 countries working on this book. Like she was moving, and then I was looking for her family in Israel. So I never found a film with her dancing, and it's a funny story about what you can read about her. When I started my book, it was in the year 2016. There was literally nothing. It was there was a small note in the English Wikipedia, but it was maybe 800 words or maybe less about Nirenska. And then I worked on this book for 6 or 5 years maybe, and in the meantime, suddenly somebody published a very long and very good researched bio on Wikipedia, on the same place where at the beginning there was only a few sentences. Somebody has made really a lot of research, and I tried to find this person through Wikipedia. I tried to identify the author, which I couldn't. I wrote the person, but she never answered. So I don't know who did make this research. And as far as I know, it's the only thing you can read about her in English. It's this bio on Wikipedia. Although, there was one, how do you call this, PhD? The text for PhD.
Dissertation,
written about 50 years ago by a young student. I somehow found it, but it was like a dissertation from 50 years ago. It's I don't even recall at the moment how did I find it. I have it somewhere, but it's not easy to find. So that's it.
There's almost nothing.
Yeah, and this made this work so fascinating because it was really like I felt like a detective. Like that's important. After her death, I mentioned it. Jan Karski has collected all her papers, a lot of them, and he has handed them over to the Library of Congress. But the papers are cleared. There is not only nothing about her love affairs with women. There is also nothing about her family in those papers. There is one piece of paper, one letter written by Pola to her sister Franka in December 1939, when she tried to find and probably rescue Franka, and she didn't get an answer. The letter came back from Warsaw, and it's the only piece of private correspondence with family, the only one piece of paper. That's why it's one of the things she wanted to forget or conceal, and that's what I said at the end of my presentation, that this is also, in this book, I described this work of discovering, of tracing her, because it's, for me, so important that, there is no way, it's not possible to hide things, like important things in life. There are always traces of it, and for a writer, it's fascinating to follow them.
Veronika, if I could intervene for 1 second, you mentioned her sister Franka.
Yeah.
And I know this was something that you wanted also to speak about a little bit.
Yeah.
But why Pola was so intensely focused on trying to find her after the war?
Because Pola had 2 sisters and 1 brother, but she actually somehow, she only mentioned Franka, the younger sister. Even Karski, when he was talking about Pola after her death, he only mentioned 1 sister, Franka. And Franka was Pola was the youngest. Franka was a bit older than Pola. And when Pola was a child, she was not a good child. She was always fighting. She was fighting her way out. And a difficult child, as you say. And Franka was defending her. So it was the beloved sister, Franka. And Franka, we don't know how did Franka die. Karski only one time, in one of his last interviews, he mentioned Franka. He said that Franka was very beautiful and had, there were Polish friends around her who were in love with her or wanted to marry her. And he said that Franka, she was in the ghetto and escaped from the ghetto and asked the friends for help, and they didn't. They gave her food, but they didn't give her shelter. So she came back to the ghetto and died. And we don't know anything about the circumstances of the death. There is only one, the document in Yad Vashem about her death, written by one of the brothers, by the brother, the only brother. And in this document, even the date of the death is uncertain. The brothers wrote, she died in 41 or 42, as if he didn't know. So I tried to, and I know that the death of Franka, according to Karski, was the reason why Pola didn't want to speak Polish never again. That she blamed Poles for the death of her sister. And I tried really very hard to find traces of Franka, and it was not possible. And I asked people like Barbara, like very renowned researchers of the topic of help, and it was just not possible to find any trace of this Franca. And then I realized it was, for me it was really a shocking thought that the Holocaust was exactly about this, that those people had to be forgotten. No trace. My mom is now 88 years old, and she lived in Warsaw before the war. And it's possible she could meet this Franca or other siblings of Pola, or even Pola herself. And my mom is still, she's alive, we can talk to her. And a woman who lived at the same time in the same place, she didn't, like Franca, didn't leave any trace. No picture, no relation, no documents, nothing. So for me, it was personally very important to understand that we cannot agree to this. It cannot happen that those people would vanish. We have to look for them. So I still look for Franca. If I have an opportunity to see an unknown document or an archive or something, I always check, is there any trace of Franca Schwarzwald? Although now I'm working on the biography of Rosa Luxemburg, which is a totally different topic and different time, I still remember about Franca. I'm not sure if I could explain it in a good way in my poor English, but I hope you understand, because you understand the subject.
I think it's clear enough.
Yeah.
It's clear enough. Alex, if I may, there
Please.
was one question that I think is probably on the minds of many people, which is, in your judgment, was Jan Karski an anti-Semite before the war?
I don't think so.
Or did he simply go along with anti-Semitic programs that were part of the national program of Poland?
Yes, I think so. He was very young at that time. He was born 1914, so he was 25 when the war started. Yes, and before he started, he had a very important relationship with his older brother. There was an older brother of Jan Karski, 16 years older. He was a policeman, and he was a companion of Piłsudski from the first, the beginning of Legiony Piłsudskiego, and like many people who started with Piłsudski during the First World War, he made a career afterwards in the interwar period. And he was before the war, he was the chief of the Warsaw police. And when the war started, he was even still a chief of the Blue Police, the brother of Jan Karski. And this brother, he was anti-Semite. And that's what Jan Karski said to Kaja Mirecka Ploss. Because the brother didn't want Karski to marry Pola. Karski was over 40 at that time. Brother was even older, but Karski asked his brother for permission to marry Pola, or maybe he asked his opinion, but the answer was no. And Kaja Mirecka Ploss asked Karski why. Was it because she was a dancer, or was it because she was Jewish? And the answer of Karski was both. So, and the influence from this older brother was really, it was overwhelming. It was because the older brother took care of the whole family before the war. He organized the life of everybody in this family. He made, all the brothers of Karski were policemen. And there were many of them, of those brothers. and they all made careers in police. And the brother wanted Karski to be a diplomat, and he helped him a lot before the war in his career. So Karski had the opportunity, had the chance to work at the Foreign Office as a very young, graduate from law school, and he just wanted his brother to be happy with him. He wanted to please his brother, and that's what he said afterwards. He has told it himself after the war. I was afraid of my brother, and I wanted him to be satisfied with me. Yeah. So I don't think he was anti-Semite. He was just what's the word? Conformist at that time. And then he realized, in my opinion, he realized afterwards, and he was ashamed of it, in my opinion. And maybe that's why of the reasons he has married Pola. But he has married Pola after the death of the brother. He waited for 5 years with the marriage with Pola. And the brother, it's also so strange, brother also killed himself. Brother came to the United States after Karski, but he was not able to learn English. And he had a poor life in the United States after the war. So he killed himself in 1964, and then after 1 year later, Karski at the end married Pola after 5 years of living together. So it's complicated. And Karski, before I started working on this book, Karski was for me a kind of monument. Like we all know him like a monument, and he's always described as a monument in books. Mm-hmm. There are many books about Karski, many biographies, and he's always, a statue, a monument.
His statue is outside of the Polish consulate in New York City.
Yeah, in Poland you have many statues of him.
Yeah,
but only when you know the story of Pola and this marriage, and that's what I found in archives, which was ignored by other historians, because they wanted a statue, they wanted a monument. Everybody wants a monument. Yeah? But
sure.
But actually, only this made him interesting for me. Mm-hmm. Like a person who evolved, who has.
And one thing I should add is that it was his idea to make this award, the Karski Award, in honor of Pola.
Yeah, I know. And that's why her name survived. This only made her name survive.
Yes.
Because she was actually cancelled. She was not existing. Yeah?
Well, unfortunately, we would like to continue, and there are many people who are still watching.
I hope we will continue if the book finds a publisher.
I hope so.
In the United States.
Veronika, let me thank you so much warmly for this wonderful program, which has been appreciated by everyone. And suggest that what you've done is, first of all, open a way toward understanding Pola Nirenska, and through her, Jan Karski, in a way that has not been possible up to now. But also, it's a pathway into this devastating history of the Jewish destiny in Poland, and the horror of this erasure that you are talking about, the complete erasure of a human existence.
Yeah.
And so we thank you. Thank you for your book, and thank you for your work.
So let's look for Franka Schwarzwald's. Never.
And we will continue to look.
Yeah, I will never stop.
Yes, and there are many other Frankas.
I perfectly understand it. It's a symbol. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.